The European Witch Hunts. The European witch hunts were one of the earliest large-scale Muggle events to shape the modern wizarding world. According to Quidditch Through the Ages and History of Magic, the panic began when Muggles started blaming unexplained illnesses, weird weather, and every slightly suspicious neighbor for sorcery. It was the medieval version of must be magic, except with pitchforks. As fear spread across villages and churches, thousands of Muggles became convinced that witches were everywhere, forcing magical communities to drastically change how they lived. Wizards weren't usually killed. Flame-freezing charms let them sit calmly on pyres, pretending to scream like it was community theater. But the real danger wasn't physical, it was social. The hunts revealed just how fast Muggles could go from hello to the medieval equivalent of Avada Muggle Davra whenever something supernatural appeared, even if the magic was completely harmless. The constant threat created a culture of secrecy long before the International Statute of Secrecy existed. Wizards stopped using magic openly, avoided Muggle towns, and began building their own isolated communities. Even Quidditch had to adapt. Matches were moved to the middle of nowhere after too many Muggles looked up and wondered why their skies suddenly had traffic. By the 1600s, magical leaders realized coexistence wasn't working. The witch hunts didn't just end lives, they ended trust. The fear, chaos, and repeated exposure incidents pushed Europe toward what wizards were already doing in practice, hiding. Everything culminated in 1692, when the Statute of Secrecy became law and officially separated the magical and non-magical worlds. The Salem Trials. The Salem Trials represent one of the most consequential Muggle persecutions in magical history. Basically, the moment North America said, "Hey Europe, hold my butterbeer." Pottermore and Ilvermorny Makusa writings confirm that several real witches and wizards lived near the Massachusetts colony at the time. But unlike Europe, where magical families had centuries of practice dodging suspicion, North American witches were newer, more scattered, and nowhere near as prepared. Think rookie-level stealth, not Hogwarts graduate. The trials triggered widespread fear among no-mages, and multiple innocent Muggles were punished for magic they definitely did not have. According to Pottermore, this wave of panic shaped the entire direction of American magical society. Makusa, founded earlier in the 17th century, took one look at Salem and said, absolutely not, immediately banning cooperation with no-mages and installing the strictest secrecy rules on the continent. The trials also influenced the founding of Ilvermorny School, which became a safe haven for young witches and wizards in an era where Muggles were pointing fingers at anything that moved. More than any earlier American event, Salem proved that no-mage paranoia could go from zero to Voldemort-level intensity overnight, cementing Makusa's long-lasting distrust of the non-magical world. The Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution reshaped the wizarding world in ways no war or persecution ever had. Beginning in the late 1700s, Muggle society suddenly leveled up. Factories everywhere, railways slicing across the countryside, cities exploding in size, and explorers mapping anything that didn't run away fast enough. This Muggle glow-up made the International Statute of Secrecy ridiculously hard to maintain. Muggles were no longer stuck in tiny villages. They were surveying land, digging mines, building roads, and taking notes like overachieving Ravenclaws. For centuries, magical creatures and settlements had stayed hidden simply by occupying remote regions. But as Muggle industry expanded, many species such as dragons, giants, and even common magical flora were pushed into shrinking habitats or had to be concealed with increasingly powerful enchantments. The Ministry of Magic expanded the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, specifically to manage rising Muggle interference. Transportation became an even bigger nightmare. New railways cut dangerously close to secret magical sites, forcing wizards to cast Muggle-repelling charms over entire landscapes. The Statute of Secrecy had to be updated in 1875 because old concealment methods just couldn't keep up with Muggle progress. By the end of the 19th century, the wizarding world had no choice but to evolve. The Industrial Revolution didn't expose magic, but it came closer than any earlier Muggle invention, including pitchforks and torches. The rise of modern Muggle governments. The rise of centralized modern Muggle governments forced the wizarding world to adapt in ways no previous era ever prepared them for. As Muggle nations built giant bureaucracies, invented paperwork that could stun a troll, and started keeping extremely detailed records, the Ministry of Magic suddenly couldn't just pretend the outside world didn't exist. This led to one of the funniest canon traditions ever. Every newly elected Muggle Prime Minister must be personally greeted by the Minister for Magic. Yes, Fudge, Scrimgeour, and even Thickness. While basically Voldemort's Bluetooth device all had to pop into that office and say, "Hi, magic is real. Please don't freak out." The point of these visits isn't cooperation, it's magical damage control. As Muggle states gained more power, magical disasters, escaped creatures, unexplained explosions, Dementors causing mass depression weather, risks being mistaken for natural emergencies. The Ministry acts like a backstage crew making sure the Muggle leaders don't accidentally blow the secret. By the early 20th century, this awkward political friendship became permanent, proving that Muggle governmental evolution didn't just reshape their world, it forced wizards to upgrade their secrecy game too. World War I. World War I didn't feature wizards charging across trenches on brooms or giants storming battlefields, though that mental image is incredible, but canon from the Fantastic Beasts timeline confirms it completely reshaped the political environment around the wizarding world. The chaos let Gellert Grindelwald move across Europe basically undetected, spreading his wizards should rule everything ideology, and recruiting followers like he was running the world's darkest loyalty program. And if you're wondering who Grindelwald is, he's the main villain of the Fantastic Beasts prequels. You probably skipped those, but trust me, he matters. He was Dumbledore's friend, and more than a friend, and many witches and wizards consider him even more dangerous than Harry's favorite noseless nemesis. Once you understand Grindelwald's role, the consequences of World War I snap into place. Borders were unstable, governments were overwhelmed, and magical ministries struggled to track dark artifact trading, rogue travel, and magical creatures displaced by Muggle warfare. Tensions between magical governments were already rising, and World War I basically hit the fast-forward button. Makusa tightened security. European ministries panicked about Grindelwald spreading unchecked, while Muggles were busy blowing each other up. For the wizarding world, World War I wasn't about the trenches, it was about the shadows, and those shadows gave Grindelwald the perfect global distraction to set up the magical conflict that would define the next decades. The Great Depression. The Great Depression didn't expose magic, but it absolutely wrecked wizarding economies, especially in North America. Beginning in 1929, the Muggle financial world collapsed after years of bad loans, market chaos, and banks behaving like Cornish pixies with checkbooks. Makusa was already trapped under Rappaport's law, which banned any cooperation with no-mages, meaning wizards couldn't trade, partner, or even casually borrow a cup of sugar without breaking federal magical law. When Muggle industries shut down, the magical world felt the shockwave. Shortages, inflated prices, and disappearing supply chains made certain potions ingredients rarer than a Hufflepuff detention. This era sparked a boom in magical smuggling, illegal potion dealing, and black market artifact swaps, basically Nocturne Alley's golden age. Magical families who quietly worked in Muggle jobs were forced to retreat back into wizarding society as unemployment spread. And while the Depression didn't change magical law, it definitely changed magical paranoia. Makusa doubled down on secrecy, worried that desperate no-mages might start noticing things they shouldn't. The lesson for wizards: Muggle crises can hit harder than a bludger to the face. World War II. World War II is the single most influential Muggle event in modern wizarding history. Basically, the moment when the no-magical world created enough chaos to accidentally shape the next Dark Lord. Canon sources, including Pottermore, Rowling's interviews, and the Fantastic Beasts timeline, confirm just how intertwined the era became with wizarding history. In the late 1930s, young Tom Riddle grew up in a Muggle orphanage surrounded by fear and the emotional warmth of a Dementor. Living in a society collapsing under pressure convinced him that vulnerability was fatal and that control was the only real protection. His rise to power lines up perfectly with the final years of World War II and the messy, leaderless aftermath that followed. At the same time, a separate wizarding war was exploding across Europe. The Fantastic Beasts series shows Grindelwald gaining enormous influence during the 1930s and early 1940s, expertly using global chaos as his personal invisibility cloak. His ideology, wizard supremacy for the greater good, mirrored the extremist movements dominating Muggle politics. And then he built Nurmengard, the world's least cozy Airbnb, to imprison opponents. Wizarding governments struggled to maintain secrecy while Muggle nations were literally on fire. Enforcing the international Statute of Secrecy became nearly impossible. Unexplained explosions, evacuations, and entire cities on the move meant magical incidents could easily blend into Muggle confusion. If you think hiding a dragon is hard, try doing it during a blackout. World War II left two defining marks on magical history. It shaped Voldemort's childhood and worldview, and it set the stage for Dumbledore's legendary 1945 duel with Grindelwald, a date Rowling deliberately aligned with the end of the Muggle War. No other Muggle conflict has ever been so deeply tangled with wizarding destiny. The Blitz of London. The Blitz, the massive bombing campaign against London in 1940 and 1941, didn't just shake Muggle Britain. It nearly gave magical London a nervous breakdown. Triggered by escalating World War II tensions, the air raids leveled entire districts. And while wizarding buildings usually survive thanks to concealment charms and the classic "you've seen nothing" Muggle spellwork, Pottermore and Rowling both confirm a sad truth. Protego works great on spells, not so much on falling chimneys. As bombs dropped, several hidden magical locations needed emergency reinforcement just to stay invisible. It was one of a few times the Ministry of Magic had to respond to a Muggle military action, not because wizards were being targeted, but because every explosion felt like a giant Lumos aimed at magical London. Even Diagon Alley risked becoming the world's most catastrophic surprise reveal. Wards were strengthened, anti-bomb charms layered on top of older protections, and Ministry officials basically turned London into the largest stealth spell ever cast. Displaced Muggles wandering too close to magical zones forced constant vigilance. Think of it as a Moody level constant vigilance, but citywide. The Blitz proved one thing: even the strongest enchantments get jumpy when the whole city sounds like a misfired Weasley's wildfire whiz-bang. Mass Muggle technology. The rise of mass Muggle technology, television, photography, audio recording, home video, and eventually digital media, created one of the greatest challenges the wizarding world had ever faced. Muggles became more capable of capturing, storing, and sharing images. Magical secrecy required constant vigilance. Memory charms, once used for isolated incidents, had to be applied strategically and on a much larger scale. The Ministry's Muggle-worthy excuse committee and the misuse of magical artifacts office expanded their duties to manage accidents that were suddenly much harder to cover up. The books give several examples of technology-related risk: the flying forward Anglia, seen by Muggles in Chamber of Secrets, the explosion at the Brockdale Bridge in Half-Blood Prince, and Harry accidentally inflating Aunt Marge in Prisoner of Azkaban, an incident that nearly became a full Muggle scandal thanks to televisions, neighbors, and an entire suburban street watching the chaos unfold. Televised news and rapid journalism forced magical authorities to intercept stories before they escalated. By the late 20th century, portable cameras, camcorders, and early digital technology meant that any magical creature, spell, or flying broomstick could be captured accidentally. Even wizarding children raised among Muggles had to be warned constantly about the dangers of being filmed. This era fundamentally changed the Ministry's workflow. Secrecy became reactive, continuous, and inseparable from Muggle technological progress. The satellite and surveillance era. Just when wizards finished adapting to Muggle cameras and television, an even bigger problem arrived: machines that could see everything from the sky. The introduction of satellites, radar systems, and global surveillance forced the wizarding world to rethink concealment entirely. Unlike earlier decades when a wizard only had to worry about a curious Muggle pointing a camcorder in the wrong direction, modern technology allowed Muggles to observe landscapes from orbit, scan regions remotely, and monitor activity with long-range sensors. Hiding from a single camera was one thing. Hiding from an always-watching planet-wide network was something else entirely. This created unprecedented exposure risks for places like Hogwarts, the Forbidden Forest, and Dragon Reserves. Magical governments responded by expanding large-scale concealment enchantments. Some regions were layered with atmospheric distortions that appear as harmless weather patterns on satellite images. Others were protected with spells that make magical landforms resemble ordinary terrain on digital maps. Rowling emphasized that the international Statute of Secrecy must evolve continuously. meticulously to stay ahead of advancing Muggle surveillance tools. This era also overlapped with the rise of urban CCTV networks, which required new counter-charms to prevent the accidental recording of magical incidents. Even minor breaches like unregistered apparition, magical creatures near city limits, or a broomstick flight at the wrong moment could be captured automatically if not shielded properly. As surveillance became increasingly automated and global, the wizarding world realized that hiding from Muggles no longer meant hiding from people at all. It meant hiding from machines, data, and algorithms. Modern Muggle crises events. In the modern world, nothing gives the Ministry of Magic a headache faster than a full-blown Muggle crisis. The moment Muggles start panicking, traffic collapsing, crowds running everywhere, weird lights in the sky, the Ministry has to jump in and make sure it wasn't caused by a magical creature having a bad day. Any major Muggle emergency triggers the wizarding version of, "Was that us? Please tell me that wasn't us." Order of the Phoenix even shows the Muggle Prime Minister getting briefed because magical incidents can look exactly like real-world disasters. One swarm of Dementors and suddenly everyone thinks it's unusual weather. One Death Eater tantrum and the news starts talking about mysterious structural failures. And with phones, drones, and live streamers everywhere, even one wizard flying home on his broom after work could trend on Twitter faster than Voldemort saying, "He's back." Now, let's talk about the 5 wizarding wars in Harry Potter. That's your next lesson here at Stickman Hogwarts. Watch it now before Voldemort gets his nose back.